A Course in
What?
with Cynthia Morgan.
Hey, course friends. Welcome to A Course in What? I'm Cynthia Morgan, and this is a podcast in which I read and discuss the text of A Course in Miracles. And this is podcast episode 22. And before we begin today, I wanted to take a quick moment to just mention my blog, which is cynthiamorganblog.com, or you can access it through my website, cynthiamorgan.us. And in that blog, there are posts, maybe 4 or 5 of them, called Test Chronicles. And there's a search bar on my blog, and you can just type in test, Tess, and those posts should come up. And those are posts of one woman's journey through hypnosis with me to the other side. So you could almost think of it as like what someone would experience after death. And the reason I bring it up is because of the listener's question in the last episode. We talked about what happens when we die. And it might be of interest to those of you who are interested in those experiences on the other side. She is this woman who came to me for a phobia, and she had this uncanny ability in hypnosis to have these experiences that really kind of came out of nowhere for her. And they were so profound and unusual that I began to chronicle them and write them down. And I have a few more that I need to put up on the website. As a matter of fact, I just saw her yesterday and she had another amazing experience. So that's what prompted me to mention it today, is because I don't see her that often, but I did see her yesterday. And she had this experience on the other side that I think you might be interested in, if you're interested in that sort of thing. So that's there and available. Okay, so we are on Chapter 2, The Separation and the Atonement, Section 6, Fear and Conflict. And in the last episode, we read paragraphs 1 through 4, and today we will read 5 through 9. So I had a very interesting experience this morning as I was approaching today's reading. I unexpectedly had the day off today because my clients canceled. So I was thinking of all the fun things that I could do today with my husband as well. And I even had this thought of going to Disneyland, which is something that is really foreign to me. I don't even like Disneyland, and I don't know why I thought of Disneyland. And maybe it's just because it represents fun and cheerful and happy place and all that kind of stuff. And that came into my mind, and I even Googled it, like, how much does it cost to go to Disneyland, and are they open, and that sort of thing. And then in the middle of my kind of internet search on Disneyland and this whim to go there today, I realized what I was doing and just literally said to myself, "What are you doing?" and stopped. And then I realized that I needed to do the podcast today. And I had already had that in my mind that I would do the podcast today. But there was a part of me that didn't really want to do the podcast today. So I opened up the book sort of begrudgingly. For the first time, actually, I haven't had this experience at all in doing the podcast or doing the reading. And it felt like a heavy burden today. It felt like an obligation that was keeping me from doing fun things like going to Disneyland. And I read the first sentence of paragraph 5, and I couldn't make any sense of it. It didn't make any sense at all to my logical mind or any part of me. And I reread it again and again, and I began to get frustrated. And I finally put my head down into my hands and then lowered my head onto the desk and was like, I can't do this. I don't get it at all. I don't know why I'm not making any sense of what the Course is saying to me today. And then I realized I needed a miracle. And so I said, I don't need to worry about what to say or what to do because he who sent me will direct me. And that, of course, comes from the prayer from a few episodes back that Jesus asks us to say in times like these. And then right after I said that, a thought hit me. And the thought was, You're doing the exact thing right now that is addressed in this first sentence. This first sentence is your experience. And I reread it and it made perfect sense. That first sentence is, fear is always a sign of strain, arising whenever what you want conflicts with what you do. My strain was coming from the conflict of not wanting to study the course today, and the need to study the course and do this podcast, and the conflict with wanting to do other things, other more fun things. So we'll read this again. Fear is always a sign of strain, arising whenever what you want conflicts with what you do. So I was going to begrudgingly try to make sense of this first sentence, even though there was a part of me that didn't want to do it at all. So I couldn't make sense of it. And all I ended up doing was putting my head down on my desk, feeling really frustrated. So it's talking about that sort of very Freudian idea of that what we say and what we do are not in alignment oftentimes. The idea of a Freudian slip, meaning that we're really thinking one thing, but then we say or do another thing. We say we want the peace of God, but we still hold on to grievances. We say we want to lose weight, but we don't exercise or eat right. We want to stop smoking, but we keep buying the cigarettes. All of that type of conflict. For me today, of course, it was, I want to go to Disneyland, but I have to sit here and study this course. So, of course, the end result was going to be feeling frustrated. So, fear is always a sign of strain, arising in your mind whenever what you want conflicts with what you do. So, fear is the conflict in our minds. 2, this situation arises in 2 ways. First, you can choose to do conflicting things either simultaneously or successively. I chose to do the podcast because it's what I felt I should do, but it's not what I wanted to do. So we choose to do behaviorally what is in conflict with our wishes or our desires. 3, this produces conflicted behavior, which is intolerable to you because the part of the mind that wants to do something else is outraged. So that outrage that I was feeling really was this sense of just frustration. The course is telling me that what it really was outrage. And even though I was only in touch with the frustration and the conflict and the strain, there was a part of me that was outraged, the course is telling me. So using another example, when we don't exercise or eat the right foods or we eat second helpings of food, we get mad at ourselves. We're outraged at ourselves for doing that. 4, second, you can behave as you think you should, but without entirely wanting to do so. So we exercise begrudgingly or stop smoking, but we're still miserable. There's a conflict between our behavior and our mind. We don't do what we need to in order to have the peace of God, like forgive or do the lessons of the course each day. But then we end up depressed or anxious or lonely or sad or fearful or whatever. So we can behave as we think we should, but without entirely wanting to do so. There's still this part of us that doesn't want to do it. 5, this produces consistent behavior, but entails great strain. So we may do the behavior consistently, but we're pissed off the whole time we're doing it. Like we may stop smoking, but we're just angry the whole time that we're not having a cigarette or that we can't have pie or whatever that is. There's a lot of strain still in our mind. And it entails great strain because your mind isn't aligned with the Holy Spirit. The great strain for me this morning was that I couldn't figure out that first sentence, which just seems really logical and easy to me now. But my mind just couldn't comprehend it. I couldn't wrap my brain around it. I might as well have been reading Greek today. That's how strained my mind was. 6, in both cases, the mind and the behavior are out of accord, resulting in a situation in which you are doing what you do not wholly want to do. We just talked about that. So the first, let's take a look here. In both cases, so in the first one where you choose to do conflicting things, or the second, you behave as you think you should, but not wanting to do so. Here it's saying, in both situations, the mind and the behavior are out of accord, resulting in a situation in which you are doing what you do not wholly want to do. 7. This arouses a sense of coercion that usually produces rage, and projection is likely to follow. Okay, so the projection is the projection of the fear, the guilt, the anger, whatever that is, and that gets projected onto others, and that gets projected onto ourselves as anxiety and depression. So he's saying that when you're in conflict, your behavior and your mind are out of accord, then with what you really want to do, then it's producing rage, which then projection follows. We all know people internalize that rage, but it comes out in some other forms through behaviors, addictions, etc. Or people are just angry people and screaming, or, extreme examples, murder. But that can be phobias and fears and anxiety attacks and panic attacks and depression and all of that stuff. That's what he's saying. Projection of all of that is likely to follow in one way or the other. 8. Whenever there is fear, it is because you have not made up your mind. So your mind is split. You haven't really bought the idea totally and completely that the Holy Spirit can give you what you want, the peace of God. We don't really believe that the peace of God will content us. And we still listen then to the ego. So once I surrendered this morning, the sentence is, now all make perfect sense to me. I find this very peaceful and joyful today. There's no conflict in my mind about doing this podcast anymore. So he's saying you have to make up your mind. You have to choose the peace of God, the Holy Spirit. 9, your mind is therefore split, and your behavior inevitably becomes erratic. Okay, I just talked about that. 10, correcting at the behavioral level can shift the error from the first to the second type, but will not obliterate the fear. So the correction of the behavior can make you do that behavior through sheer will, but it won't heal your mind. Paragraph 6, sentence 1. It is possible to reach a state in which you bring your mind under my guidance without conscious effort, but this implies a willingness that you have not developed as yet. He's saying that it's possible for us to be in a state where we don't have to stop and feel that conflict or frustration and then surrender it and ask for a miracle or to see the situation differently. It's possible to just always be in that state of grace, connected to God and the Holy Spirit, so that our mind is under his guidance. But right now, we need to make the conscious efforts. We haven't developed really our belief in the idea that when we choose the Holy Spirit over the ego, we win. There's a part of us that believes we lose still. And that's why it's going to take conscious effort and repetition, really. Clearly, my mind wasn't under Jesus' guidance when I sat down to do the podcast this morning, or I wouldn't have strained so much. There wouldn't have been that conflict. It was only after I chose to surrender and asked for his guidance that it became easy. 2, the Holy Spirit cannot ask more than you are willing to do. So salvation is a collaborative venture. This is sort of a take on the idea that God doesn't give you more than you can handle. The Holy Spirit can't ask more than you are willing to do, because it's your willingness that allows him in. 3, the strength to do comes from your undivided decision. So the strength to do this podcast today came from my undivided mind. My mind was stuck in the fear and my ego. And when I aligned it back to the Holy Spirit, it was no longer split on this decision. So again, sentence 3, the strength to do comes from your undivided decision. 4. There is no strain in doing God's will as soon as you recognize that it is also your own. And that's, of course, referring to what I just talked about when I was saying that we still believe that we lose when we choose the Holy Spirit. The sooner we recognize that God's will is also our will, the sooner we heal. And life becomes easier. And we think that God's will isn't our own because our ego speaks first and loudest. It's always telling us its will. So we have a hard time hearing God's will as well. 5. The lesson here is quite simple, but particularly apt to be overlooked. Okay, so we can see that he's going to make something very clear to us here. 6. I will therefore repeat it, urging you to listen. Okay, so he's asking us to sit up and pay attention here. He's getting serious. 7. Only your mind can produce fear. There you go. And that is the entire course summed up in this sentence, the idea that your mind is the creator. 8. It does so whenever it is conflicted in what it wants, producing inevitable strain because wanting and doing are discordant. Okay, so I think we talked about that. 9. This can be corrected only by accepting a unified goal. And by a unified goal, it means unifying your will with the will of God. Paragraph 7, sentence 1. The first corrective step in undoing the fear is to know first that the conflict is an expression of fear. So here he's going to tell us how to do this, to correct this error. And this is what I love about A Course in Miracles. It's really a step-by-step guide. It's very practical. And not just the workbook of 365 lessons telling you exactly what to do every hour of your day, but there are these gems of exercises sprinkled throughout the text of A Course. So first we must understand that if we are conflicted, we are in fear. And really when I say conflicted, I'm not talking about conflicted about a decision. I just mean when your mind isn't at peace, you're in fear. And what are we ultimately in fear of? Of returning our mind to God. So that fear always involves separation. All right, let's read that again. The first corrective step in undoing the error is to know first that the conflict is an expression of fear. So really, it's just acknowledging that this is your ego speaking. 2, say to yourself that you must somehow have chosen not to love, or the fear could not have arisen. So he's saying, acknowledge that. Say it to yourself and remind yourself, somehow I chose not to love. 3, then the whole process of correction becomes nothing more than a series of pragmatic steps in the larger process of accepting the atonement as the remedy. Okay, so there's a whole step-by-step process that then occurs. 4, these steps may be summarized in this way, and I'll just read each of these. 5, know first that this is fear. 6, fear arises from lack of love. 7, the only remedy for lack of love is perfect love. 8, perfect love is the atonement, or God's love. That's another way of saying that. If you turn to page 14, you'll see that in italics at the bottom of the page, that little sort of prayer thing where it says, perfect love casts out fear. If fear exists, then there is not perfect love. But only perfect love exists. If there is fear, it produces a state that does not exist. So this idea that getting back to page 30, the only remedy for lack of love is perfect love. Perfect love casts out fear. This is another one of those sections to maybe bookmark or just put a star next to if you don't mind writing in your book. I don't know, some people really have an issue with writing in their Course in Miracles book, and other people like me, just if you saw my book, you wouldn't even be able to read it. It's just completely torn up and written across, and sometimes I can't even read it. But this is one of those sections because he's talking about what we need to do in those situations where we are stuck in fear and conflict, and acknowledging, say, like in sentence 2, say to yourself that you must have chosen not to love. And he's actually saying, do this, like actually do this, actually stop and say to yourself, I somehow must have chosen not to love. And then just by saying that, you open your mind to this understanding. Know first that this is fear. Fear arises from lack of love. The only remedy is perfect love. Perfect love is the atonement. Okay, that's how we undo the carpet of time. That's how we roll it back up, is accepting that perfect love, that atonement. Okay, paragraph 8. I have emphasized that the miracle or the expression of atonement is always a sign of respect from the worthy to the worthy. The miracle is always an extension of love. And that extension of love is always a sign of respect from the worthy to the worthy. So your mind is aligned with the Holy Spirit when you're extending a miracle. You can't extend a miracle and think that you're unworthy in that moment or that the other person is unworthy. You have to, at least temporarily, for a moment, if you're extending love from yourself to another, believe that you're both worthy. 2. The recognition of this worth is reestablished by the atonement. So you can only know your worth when you remember who you are, and that's the atonement. 3, it is obvious then that when you are afraid, you have placed yourself in a position where you need atonement. So that's why the atonement was established. It was established because we placed ourselves in a position of separation in our mind where we needed it. And that belief in separation then created fear. Oh, and I wanted to mention in sentence 2, the recognition of this worth is reestablished by the atonement because, again, the atonement was established for that healing of the mind. And so the recognition of this worth is reestablished in your mind because it can't be true that you are unworthy. It's only true that you forgot your worth, and that's why it's reestablished. 4, you have done something loveless, having chosen without love. So when you forget your worth, you act lovelessly. When you forget who you are, you find yourself in fear and conflict. And 5, this is precisely the situation for which the atonement was offered. We wouldn't need the atonement if we remembered who we were. 6, the need for the remedy inspired its establishment. So our forgetfulness led to the establishment of the atonement process. 7, as long as you recognize only the need for remedy, you will remain fearful. So you will remain fearful because you must accept it, not just recognize it. If I just recognized that I needed help today with this podcast, that wouldn't be enough. I had to ask for it and to accept it. 8, however, as soon as you accept the remedy, you have abolished the fear. So as soon as I opened myself through the willingness to see the situation differently this morning, I then accepted the remedy. I wasn't in conflict anymore. That's why willingness is so important. The conscious effort to align our mind is so necessary for us now. 9, this is how true healing occurs. And it's true healing because it's healing the mind of the one true problem, the belief in separation, and the one true solution, which is obviously joining our mind back to God. Paragraph 9. And this is actually a really great paragraph because it talks about the mind's potential. I really like this one. 9. Sentence 1. Everyone experiences fear. Everyone experiences fear because we haven't accepted the atonement. So everyone is living guided by their ego. I suppose there's probably a few exceptions to this, right? But I think he's just generally saying if you're reading this course, you're everyone. 2, yet it would take very little right thinking to realize why fear occurs. Okay, so we just talked about that, why fear occurs. 3, few appreciate the real power of the mind, and no one remains fully aware of it all the time. So we're not fully aware of that potential in our mind all the time because we're directed in the world and in the body and we're doing stuff. We're busy. We have jobs, we have families, etc. We're not sitting in an ashram all day, every day, just looking at our thoughts. And neither are people who are sitting in ashrams. They have to eat and they have to get up and they have to use the bathroom. And like, we're not just all the time focused on our minds. So that's why no one remains fully aware of it all the time. 4, however, if you hope to spare yourself from fear, there are some things you must realize and realize fully. Okay, so I feel like here he goes again. He's trying to make a point. 5, the mind is very powerful and never loses its creative force. So the mind isn't stagnant. At each moment, we're either thinking with ego or thinking with love. We're either moving closer to God or we're staying stuck, staying away from Him. 6, it never sleeps. So even at night, the subconscious mind is still creating dreams, etc., visiting the other side, whatever it's doing. 7, every instant it is creating. We just talked about that. 8, it is hard to recognize that thought and belief combine into a power surge that can literally move mountains. And it can literally move mountains because we created this entire dream. The collective Son of God is dreaming this dream. We're dreaming the mountains. We're dreaming everything. So that's the power surge. It's hard to recognize that because, of course, once we get here and we are stuck in this body and in this ego guilt, we don't recognize that we are the dreamer. We just believe that we are in the dream, which is our reality. 9, it appears at first glance that to believe such power about yourself is arrogant, but that is not the real reason you do not believe it. So we often think, who am I to think that I'm that powerful? We think that it's humble to think of ourselves as, oh, I'm not that powerful. I don't have that much influence. 10, you prefer to believe that your thoughts cannot exert real influence because you are actually afraid of them. So we're afraid of that power in our mind. We're afraid of if we really look at what's happened here, we're afraid of the wrath of God because we've created this world separate from Him. So we're afraid of our thoughts. We're afraid of our mind. We're afraid to go within and meditate. We're afraid to really delve into A Course in Miracles. We're afraid to really look inside. 11, this may allay awareness of the guilt, but at the cost of perceiving the mind as impotent. Because you can't be guilty if you haven't done anything. And that's how it allays the awareness of guilt. So not believing that we can create this separation from God in this world seems to allay the guilt, but we're then disempowered. The cost is that we never heal because we're always a victim. 12, if you believe that what you think is ineffectual, you may cease to be afraid of it, but you are hardly likely to respect it. Yeah, so if we believe that what we think is ineffectual, we're no longer afraid of it. But again, we don't have the respect for that. 13, there are no idle thoughts. Every thought is a healing thought or a hurtful thought. Every thought is creating. Every instant, as the Course just says, is creating. 14, all thinking produces form at some level. So this is one of those sentences that I have thought about so many times over the years. I've studied this sentence. I've meditated on this sentence. I have taken walks thinking about this sentence. The sentence comes up in my mind at crazy times. On one level, I don't know what this sentence means. On another level, which is funny because it's saying at some level, I do know what this sentence means. And I tend to analyze things to death. And that's probably why I'm reading A Course in Miracles, sentence by sentence and explaining it because I do that. And so this sentence, all thinking produces form at some level. I understand it on one level. I understand that if I have a happy thought or a sad thought, an ego thought or a thought of the Holy Spirit, that produces how I feel that day. And it can change my decision-making process. On some level, that thought changes me. Maybe I decide to go to Disneyland because I've had a certain thought, or maybe I decide to study A Course in Miracles because I've had a certain thought. And so on some level, I'm seeing the results of that thinking. Or maybe it's just that I feel a certain way, and that's what it's saying. It produces form at some level. Maybe I have a physiological response to thinking a thought in a certain way. But does it also mean that all thought, no matter what I think, has a parallel universe of that thought? I don't know. It's saying all thinking produces form at some level. It's not saying all thinking produces some form at some level. It says all thinking produces form at some level. And maybe I'm just overanalyzing this. That could be true. But I don't exactly know. I haven't figured out what is the truth of that sentence on the deepest level. It could be talking about the world and parallel universes, and that every time I think of something that on some level it's creating that experience, or it could just be that if I'm thinking that thought, I feel anxious. So I don't know. I'll leave it up to you to decide what that sentence means. It's just something more to think about. Oh, and I just want to add that all of that questioning took place about 18 years ago, and something happened over the years where I just accept this statement as a truth now, and I no longer need to figure out exactly what it meant. And you may find that this is true for you as you continue to study the course. Something sticks out, a sentence sticks out, or you have a question that comes up through your reading and it doesn't make any sense, and you look at it from every angle and maybe even ask someone or meditate on it or do an internet search or whatever, but nothing totally answers your question or feels satisfying to you. And then at some point, I guarantee that you will either find an answer that does satisfy you, or you'll have an experience that gives you a knowingness or a peace with the question. Or the question will simply drop away, as in my case with this last sentence. And at any rate, it's a worthwhile pursuit to ask those questions and to mull them over, because that's how you arrive at an answer, even if the answer is no answer. All right, we've just finished this section. So I would love to stay in touch with you if you like. Besides just listening and me reading the course, if you want to introduce yourself, or if you have any questions or comments, or maybe you have a thought to that last sentence that I haven't even thought, I would love to hear from you. You can find me on my website, cynthiamorgan.us, and you can contact me through that. I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/Cynthia Morgan Hypnotherapy. And I'm on Twitter at Cynthia S. Morgan. So thank you so much for joining me today. And if you'd like to say the summary of A Course in Miracles with me, that would be great. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God.